we really have looked forward to talking about this because we think it's a very unique subject. We are the Airborne and Special Operations Museum, and if you don't know where we're located in downtown Fayetteville, about 10 miles from Fort Bragg. But we are still a U.S. Army museum, and when you step foot inside of our museum, it's like being on Fort Bragg. And well, I'll talk a little bit later about how that can be a unique environment to work in. But we're part of the U.S. Army Center of Military History and the Army Museum enterprise. And our mission is to tell the U.S. Army Airborne and Special Operations story from 1940 to the present. And that also exposes challenges, but that's for a whole different paper to talk about that. Because we're located downtown, we get approximately 145,000 visitors a year, which is pretty significant for the Army, especially since the majority of Army museums are behind the gate, and it can be intimidating for some people to try to get on that. But just to give you a little bit of background, Fayetteville's been around a long time. It was founded in 1749. It was a town called Cross Creek. And later on, there was a town, 1762, another town close by, Camelton was created. And my colleague here, Denise, she's a fan of Outlander, and if you're a fan of Outlander, they do talk about Cross Creek, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, I outed her dirty little secret there. But I found it on Netflix, so I'm going to start watching it because she said it's worthwhile. But in 1783, during the close of the Revolution, those two towns merged and became Fayetteville in honor of the Marquis de Lafayette. So we started a military connection there. And also during the Civil War, during Sherman's March to the Sea, he stopped by Fayetteville. Fayetteville surrendered, so the town did not get burned, but there was an arsenal that the Confederates had taken over at the start of the war that the Union Army did burn. But we move on to World War I. And during the close of World War I, the Army decided to build a post near Fayetteville, 10 miles outside, for the training of artillery troops. It was completed in September of 2018, which we just celebrated our 100th anniversary, believe it or not. It was named for a Confederate general, North Carolinian, Braxton Bragg, but our PAO at Fort Bragg tells everybody it was named not for his service in the Confederate Army, but his service during the Mexican War to alleviate any issues there. But to talk about its World War I service, it really almost in the 20s got closed, but they decided that, hey, we need this base here, and they made it officially a fort. So it became Fort Bragg in 1922. But it stayed pretty much a quiet post. Oh, thank you. And as you can see here, this is a picture during the Second World War. And basically, it was a boom town. It went from 5,400 troops to 100,000 troops during World War II, and by 1943. And then, just to give you an idea, though, in 1942, it became the home of the Airborne, and they were doing training at Camp McCall, which is nearby. And then again in 1951, the 82nd Airborne and the 18th Airborne Corps, that became their permanent home, became the home of the Airborne. And then in 1952, Special Forces, the Green Berets. Their headquarters was established there, and we became the home of the Airborne and Special Operations Forces. And if you go to Fort Bragg today, they very proudly say that we are the center of the military universe. And that when the president calls 911, Fort Bragg picks up. But to talk a little bit about the museum. Is it that one? Oh, thank you. Well, in Fayetteville was not the best of towns when the Vietnam War took off. A lot of troops were coming in and deploying from Fort Bragg, and the locals, they were entrepreneurs and were looking for something for these young soldiers to do, so they did develop these cultural institutions that you see here, the Seven Drawers and the Lucky Saloons and so forth, and it started to get the nickname of Vietnam, not only because these troops were deploying from there, but because of how dangerous it could be in Fayetteville at the time. And we have plenty of volunteers at the museum who were here during the Vietnam era, and they talk about how Friday and Saturday nights, a deuce and a half would come down from Fort Bragg, and with the Fayetteville PD, they would load up the drunk soldiers and rowdy soldiers and take them back to the post. So it really did get a bad reputation, frankly, that they're still trying to fight today. It was funny when we're preparing this paper, we're getting ready to come here, and last week before I left to come, I saw a gentleman wearing a T-shirt that said Vietnam. So that still does persist there. But to talk about how the museum got started. The idea for an airborne and special operations museum started as early as 1982. Then commander of the 18th Airborne Corps, General James Lindsay, he wanted to build a museum to talk about not just the 82nd Airborne, which was at Fort Bragg, and the Green Berets at Fort Bragg, which they both have their own museums there, by the way, on post, but talk about all airborne units and special operations units in the Army. So he actually was able to get some money from the government and broke ground on Fort Bragg in 1984, believe it or not. But then the then mayor of Fayetteville and city council members, they started talking to General Lindsay in the Army, and they said, hey, why don't you build this museum downtown? And they thought, wow, okay, would be a good idea, because Fayetteville is such a big part of the community with Fort Bragg, and vice versa. They decided that they would do this, and also that it would help with the urban renewal. So in 1990, the Airborne and Special Operations Museum was created, and they started raising money and building the museum. The museum was built, opened in August of 2000. It was owned by the foundation. The employees working there, collections managers, curators, so forth, worked for the United States Army, and the collection belonged to the U.S. Army, but it was a foundation building. Then in 2007, and this was always the intention, the Airborne and Special Operations Foundation, they gifted the museum to the United States Army. So now we are a U.S. Army museum. That's why when you walk through our doors, it's like being on post. But then we do get some unique situations, because 5 feet out from our museum belongs to the city of Fayetteville that our foundation leases. So even though we've been there for almost 20 years now, there is a little bit of an identity crisis. Like people, even on post, they think we are still, well, you're not on post, so how could you be an Army museum? They go, yeah, we really are. Here's my CAT card, my GS ID. Yes, we are an Army museum. So we still do fight that. We still do fight that, but we're working to fix that. But what I'd like to do now is just say the picture on the left shows where the museum, what it looked like before the museum was built, and then the right side talks about the museum. But I talked enough about the old, because I am old, so I'm gonna hand it over to Denise to talk about the new and innovative changes that are happening in Fayetteville because of the museum.
We have a good time at the ASOM, if you can't tell. So I'm sure if any of you spent time in the Army, the 70s to late 1990s, you would know the reputation that Fayetteville had. And it's been a few decades of overcoming that reputation of Vietnam. So from the time the museum opened in 2000, the Vietnam image of the downtown area has rapidly faded, which is great. It was this Hay Street, which is this street you're overlooking here on the far, well, both images. That's the rear entrance to our museum. It was the red light district of Vietnam. So you might remember that if you spent any time there. But now it's undergone a cultural renaissance, if you will. So we have coffee shops, restaurants, boutiques, art galleries, museums, theaters, townhomes, condominiums, and now a new minor league team. So it's really family friendly and quite a departure from what we've experienced in the past. So this is another view of Hay Street in the 70s versus fairly recently in 2012. So these are just some of the buildings that have undergone the adaptive reuse that has led to the cultural renaissance. The Amtrak station is our next door neighbor, and it is a historic monument, marker, I guess, in Fayetteville. It was built in the early 1900s. It was placed on the historic register in 1981, so they were kind of limited to what they could do to the facade of the place, but they redid it, and they have wheelchair accessibility, made it adaptable for today's clientele that they have. The Fayetteville Area Transport and Local History Museum was originally built as a railroad depot in 1890, but the museum reopened as a museum in May of 2006 with, again, accessibility in mind. And then Fascinate You is a children's museum, so we have children now instead of red light district ongoings. Really cute place, but it was built in the 1940s. It's a historic structure, so they had to keep the facade, but it has all the amenities inside. So updated electric, updated HVAC systems, elevators, everything that you wouldn't have had in the 1940s, but we have now. So now we have theaters. So this is the Cameo Theater. A side note about the Cameo Theater, we recently had a very famous visitor come to Fayetteville. Oscar-nominated actor Tom Hardy came to visit the Special Forces community, and he premiered his film Venom for two audiences, one at the Cameo and then the other at the ASOM, so we were very honored to have him. But that kind of shows where we've come, so if we're getting highfalutin actors in Fayetteville. So this is another one that went through a lot of restoration, and they now show modern productions and a very family-friendly place. The Arts Council and Moonlight Communications. The Arts Council building was an old post office building. It was left abandoned for a while, and they received an award for achievement in the field of historic preservation in North Carolina. So, most recently, the Prince Charles Hotel. So this is adjacent to the Amtrak station. There's an empty lot, and then the hotel. So this is kind of our next door neighbor. It was. If you talk to any of our volunteers that have spent a significant amount of time at Fort Bragg, they say that this was the happening spot. They would go to dances in the ballroom, just had a lot of fun, a lot of good memories made at the Prince Charles. But as you can tell, it is completely dilapidated. It's been abandoned, I think, since the 1980s. And 2017, I believe, and renovated. It opened to the public or opened for renting or purchase in April, and it has 59 apartments, retail space, upscale restaurants, the whole 9 yards. It had to be outfitted with restored windows, HVAC systems, the whole 9 yards, but the historic structure had to stay. A side note about this one, Babe Ruth stayed here when he hit his first professional home run in Fayetteville, so a little known fact about Fayetteville. But in talking with the developer, he used the ASOM as a key anchor in attracting capital for building for his project. So it showed that restoration and the crowds will come. You just have to build it. But it's not just that. We have new stuff going on in Fayetteville. Like I mentioned before, we have a minor league team. It's called, they play at Segra Field. They're a Houston Astros affiliate. I have not been to any games. Jim has. A lot of fun. But yeah, it shows a different side of Fayetteville that we're quite proud of. Also, there's condominiums built across the street from it's hard to give the geography here, but they're built across Bragg Boulevard from us. This is Iron Mike is our little mascot here. He's in this. Iron Mike is right here. He is in front of our museum. But these condos take the place of what was once a seedy Days Inn hotel that had a very nasty reputation, and rented by the hour if you didn't catch that, but it was nasty. It was torn down. It was purchased by the city in 2006. They tore it down. It sat vacant for a little while. A board member of the foundation purchased the land. He's a local developer, and made these beautiful townhomes and condos. They actually go anywhere from $300,000 to $500,000, which is outside any Soldiers BAH and for Fayetteville, which shows that it's attracting a new clientele to the area. Let's see. Now you might be asking, how do we do this? First of all, we like to think we connect the military to the civilian community. And as Jim touched on before, Fort Bragg just celebrated its 100th anniversary, and we worked with the civilian community, local museums, local business people to bring this exhibit to our museum. It showed the partnership that Fayetteville has with the with Fort Bragg community, and we're very proud of it. That's one example of how we connect everyone together. Second, making Special Forces history accessible to the public. Special Forces history is just inherently cool, and I think part of that is the secrecy behind it. And we're authorized as GS employees to tell their story, albeit a sanitized version of what they do. But it also offers a window into their lives. And we recently had two very special exhibits. This one right here was from the Battle of, what am I doing? Okay, there we go. This is the rotor from Super 6-1. It belonged to, it's from the Battle of Mogadishu. So if you've seen Black Hawk Down, we're very lucky to have this rotor as part of our collection. And it was part of a greater exhibit on the Battle of Mogadishu. So, and that's something the public really didn't know much about until we were able to present this story in a way that had never been told, aside from the movie. So, and we also were able to do that with 12 Strong, the recent movie on the initial actions into Afghanistan after September 11th. Also, we celebrate military history with the public, and we do that mostly through National Airborne Day. So it celebrates every year the commemoration of the first American airborne jump. And our parade field is overrun with soldiers teaching children and everyone all about what they do. Again, I cannot seem to get this to work. Anyway, it's the third picture there. Our lobby is overrun with Special Forces, soldiers teaching children, everyone in the community about what they do. And we have reenactors all through our gallery showing different aspects of history. And this is a big event for us. We average about 3,000 guests, which is significantly more than what we do average on a daily basis. And then we invite the community to participate in commemorative events. Our example of this is the first picture on the slide. It's the Field of Honor, and this is to commemorate every patriotic holiday we have over the summer. It runs through Memorial Day, the 4th of July. The community is invited to place a flag in honor of a service member in this field, and it's really just the most stunning display we could have. The pictures don't do it justice. It's up right now. If you're going to pass through Fayetteville anytime soon, it's worth a stop. Next, Jim and I and our colleagues, we frequently go to local organizations to give talks about ongoings at the museum. We feel it gives them a buy-in to what we do at the museum. It connects everybody, really. And then lastly, we engage with local universities for special projects and internships, but we go above and beyond the normal internships. Recently, in 2017, this rotor, the word got out that we had it. A professor at the Citadel acquired this new 3D scanning technology and wanted to teach his students how to use it. So they came and scanned this, and mutually beneficial. We get to preserve this for all time and get to use it in a variety of ways when we redo our permanent gallery and can incorporate this. But it also taught them how to use it. So we're very, very proud and happy that they chose us as their guinea pigs. So really, that concludes our presentation. So the ASOM has used the last 20 years to try to overcome this Vietnam image, and we're proud that we have a part in how we're turning that around for the community.
Thank you. Questions? I see that Nancy has one.
What is the difference between your museum with the U.S. Army Airborne and Special Operations and the Air Force Museum in Dayton?
Well, it's strictly U.S. Army history, like the 82nd Airborne, 101st Airborne during World War II, 173rd Airborne. We don't tell the story of the planes, the Air Force, who they say, put the air in airborne, but we tell about the soldiers after the U.S. Army soldiers after they jumped out of the airplanes were the special operations.
So airborne is defined as
paratroopers, men, women who jumped, like on D-Day, jumped out of the airplanes, and they're U.S. Army. So once they hit the ground, they're infantry. Oh, you're welcome.
Other questions?
Yeah, my question, visited there years ago back when the Army Museum system still had training conferences and the museum hosted it. The one always caught me is what's going to happen if you want to expand your display areas and you need to build on it when you're dealing with the city and trying to find space?
Well, that's a good question, James. That's a good question, James, and Denise, you can jump in too. But basically, what would have to happen is that our nonprofit, the ASOM Foundation, they would have to approach the city to see if they could lease more ground, and they can get permission to do so, and then they would go through the whole rigmarole of raising the money to build that structure, and then again gift it to the Army. We haven't broached that subject yet, but I know that we will probably in the next 15, 20 years, because because our story is ongoing, we are already bursting at the seams, and we're doing pretty much a stopgate thing right now because our foundation, they're now starting to get a little more proactive in raising money, and we're going to reconfigure our gallery, and with the use of technology, be able to consolidate some of those old exhibits from 20 years ago, where you have lots of photos and panels, and maybe shrink that, where we're showing videos or something like that, and be able to add in more artifacts, particularly that tell the story of the war on global terrorism, because that's or along this war, and where we're lacking right at the moment.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you so much.